Hi, this is Sierra Dahl. Welcome to the Get Real, How to Live a More Authentic Life podcast with Dr. Barry Weinhold. Dr. Barry is living proof that it's possible to overcome a traumatic childhood and move forward and have a successful, happy, and self-aware life. As a result of his experiences, he has devoted the past 45 years as a therapist, university professor, and author of over 80 books to develop cutting-edge approaches that can show you how to achieve the life that you want. We'd like to hear from you. So send us your stories and your questions, and Dr. Barry may feature you on a future podcast. If you subscribe to the podcast, you'll receive a free self-assessment tool that will help you evaluate how you might be able to move your life forward more effectively. Now here's Dr. Barry.
So, Sierra, thank you so much for the introduction. I want to tell everybody that how pleased I am to be working with you on this project. You're one of the smartest people I know.
Oh my gosh.
And one of the most integrated and one of the kindest people I know. So what can I go wrong by having you be as moderator?
I don't know. I guess we'll find out, won't we?
Well, I think.
But thanks so much for that, Barry.
Sure. And today's topic, and another thing about the podcast, we're going to try to make this as conversational as possible. Now, Sierra and I have these conversations all the time. So you get to listen in to probably one of the conversations that we've had at some point along the way when we talk about these topics. So it's going to be an adventure to share all that with you and share it with it in a way that makes sense to you and helps you in your life to become more authentic and to live a more effective life. And so we'll welcome all comments and feedback as we move forward on this, and we'll say a little bit more about that later. But I just want to get into the topic a little bit. And I thought about this topic just recently because of the mass shooting in Maine. And I thought about what would trigger somebody to go to that extreme. And I mean, the whole idea of triggers are that they're simply our body remembers everything. And so if there's something that got our attention and didn't get quite settled, it keeps showing up in our lives. The reason it does is that that's our natural learning style. We do anything that we don't finish will continue to show up in our lives. And it's basically when you talk about a trigger, you're triggering a memory of something that happened in the past that was not finished. And so that's what triggers are about. And basically almost all domestic violence, child abuse, and other forms of conflict in relationship often are related to what people do with their triggers. Are you aware of what triggers you sometimes, Sarah?
Well, what triggers me has more to do with what triggers you and how I react to it.
It is an interactive process, and that's what happens in a relationship. Is one person gets triggered, says something, and then the other person's triggered, and you're
I tend to respond to what you have said.
Yeah.
And you've had a really traumatic beginning in your childhood. So you've had a lot of things to get triggered over your lifetime, and you managed to handle those quite well. So what are some of the things that you've had as far as triggers go in your early life? How are they affecting you now?
You conveniently evaded my question.
Oh, okay. Well, what was your question?
What were some of your triggers?
Yes, I did evade that. You got me there. Oh, gee. One of my triggers is when somebody doesn't listen to me. I feel that I'm being ignored and not valued. So something's important and I say something and the person doesn't respond like I just didn't do to you. I feel sometimes like I'm not being valued for who I am.
Yeah. I understand that. I think I get triggered also sometimes with that. What else triggered you? Anything else?
Yeah. being accused of something I didn't do. That is probably one of my top triggers as far as personal relationships are concerned. Of course, there's things like cars cutting you off in traffic and all these other things.
Yeah.
I think, when I go through life and I try to be really good at what I'm doing and be good to other people, and then all of a sudden somebody comes back with an assumption about what I might have said that I didn't say and blames me for it when I didn't mean what they thought I meant. That for me is a trigger, and that's upsetting to me. Yeah, and I
Yeah.
react to that.
Well, triggers for me are strange. Some of them, I have, I get triggered when I see women chewing gum. I don't know what that's about, but that's something that.
You mean I have to put this away?
Oh, you have to put.
Shoot, here I thought I'd have a chance to
Oh,
get some
darn.
comment.
Uh, well, better luck next time.
Well, I have to ask you then, how in the world, what is it about chewing gum that triggers you? I mean,
I
that's
have no
weird.
idea. It must have been something about connected to something growing up. I had apparently some relative that I didn't like that came every time they came to their house, they were chewing gum. And
Really?
I also have a thing about smoking. Both my parents smoked, and
Yes.
I got my share of secondhand smoke, and smoking still triggers me. But
Yeah, I can understand that. You
the
know,
other
I
thing,
mean, that's upsetting to be around somebody that's smoking if you're not a smoker. So yes. And
yeah.
thank goodness the laws have changed, so we're not dealing with that as much anymore as we used
Well,
to.
when we lived in Europe, none of the restaurants had a no smoking section.
Oh
It
dear.
everybody smoked over there, and it was really hard to go out to eat. We usually tried to find a place near the window.
Well, aside from that, what kind of relationship triggers do you have as a result of your upbringing? I mean, between us, I trigger you every once in a while. What kind of triggers do you have?
Well, sometimes you'll say and do things that remind me of past relationships that are probably unfinished, and you don't know what that is. And often when it happens, I don't know immediately. I have to think about it. What is triggering me here? And it's often something you've said or done that someone in past relationships said and did to me that was unpleasant to me.
You know, that kind of gets
Not
back
just
into being
doesn't
accused of something I didn't mean to or say in a certain way that you took in a totally different way that wasn't intended to be that way. And all of a sudden you're upset with me over something like, what?
that's what happens
What
with
did I do to cause that reaction?
that's that's what happens with triggers, is that it reminds you of some other place with some other people. And so in a sense, when you get triggered, you go out of present time. And so what you say and do may not make any sense in present time. But if you understand where it comes from, it makes perfect sense. And that's the whole kind of puzzle with triggers, is how do you bring them under your control? How do you kind of, because everybody gets triggered. I don't know if anybody on the planet who ever was able to live through a lifetime without getting triggered some way by something, because our body remembers everything that happened to us, and then it reacts to and actually Carl Jung called that our shadow. And we're coming up, we're just past Halloween here, and in Europe, when we lived there in Switzerland, Halloween went from the 31st of October to the beginning of Lent. And they saw it as an opportunity for people to bring their shadow out and wear costumes that represented their shadow. And they would have a great deal of fun. Now, the Swiss are pretty introverted people, so this gave them permission to be more extroverted, and they took advantage of it. And so I think that the whole idea that, in relationship, it gives us an opportunity when we get triggered to heal something in us that we maybe we didn't even know that it needed some attention, and suddenly there it is. and so what happens though with most people when they get triggered, and you know this, it happens with me when I get triggered. I want to get rid of that as fast as possible. And sometimes I will project that on somebody else. Oh, you're doing what I'm doing, and that'll get rid of it for me for the moment. Or simply, and this is where addictions come in, because basically triggering can lead to an addiction, which I call an addiction to your comfort zone. Because one of the things that automatically happens when people get triggered is that they seek comfort and try to, because the old feelings connected with whatever is unfinished often are more intense than what we would have imagined. And so we get a little scared about this. Oh my God, what's happening here to me? And so the whole idea of looking at triggers as an opportunity to deepen your relationships, to deepen your own psychological intelligence, as I'm going to be talking about later in one of the podcasts this month. It's just an opportunity to reflect, self-reflect. Why am I reacting? And actually, I didn't define, the best definition I have of a trigger is this. This happens, and this is our reaction. That tells us every time that happens, you're being triggered by something. And most people don't take time to even try to figure out what's triggering them and what to do about it. They quickly try to get it out of their system. They try to return to their comfort zone. They may even turn to any kind of addiction that's their favorite one, like alcohol, drugs, shopping, sex, gambling. I mean, you name it. There's so many different addictions that people can use to try to restore that sense of comfort that they've lost when they get triggered. And
Well, I have to say that as relationships go, I haven't been in one before where anybody is as aware as you are of what happened and why it happened, and able to step back and think about it and realize what the result was from something that happened in your past. So I sure give you credit for that. That's unusual. But how do you do that? How do you go from just being really upset about something to stopping and thinking about it?
I just ask myself questions. I just say, okay, Barry, you're overreacting to this. What's going on? Where does this come from? What does this connect to from your past? And then if I can find that, I can say, well, okay, what's unfinished about that? That makes it keeps happening and keep coming up to trigger me. Because that's what causes a trigger, is that there's something unfinished. Because your natural learning style is you want to finish everything. And so that's what I ask myself. I ask myself, where's this come from? What's unfinished about it? And if I've done something in the midst of being triggered, I apologize. I mean,
Yeah, you're good at that. I agree.
I take back if I projected anything. That's the other thing that we need to do in relationship. If we see ourselves projecting, take it back and say, hey, I just projected on you something that came from somewhere else with some other person, and I apologize.
And I think from my perspective of not being heard, it comes a lot from my childhood where I didn't have any ability to actually have any input. I mean, my parents decided everything for me, so I didn't feel like my opinion was important or counted. And I imagine that has a lot to do with that kind of a trigger on my end as well.
Yeah. So my advice to people is take advantage of being triggered. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It actually means that you're just using your natural learning style to figure out things. And so take the opportunity that a triggering response provides for you to say, where's this come from? What's missing? And what can I do now to finish it if it's still unfinished? And those are kind of the ways that I think that you can bring your triggering responses under your own control by some self-reflection. Where's this come from? And all the other questions I mentioned. And then also, well, what do I have to change related to that? I mean, maybe I have to change my outlook on something, or stop getting so upset about something I can't control. And so I might look at it and say, okay, I am being triggered right now, and why I'm being triggered, and is there what can I do about that? That's the biggest question. What can I do about that? So does that make sense, Sierra?
Of course it does. But a question I have for you is, did your children trigger you?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so how did you respond to that? Because I had the same thing. I mean, it took me a long time to not allow my son to trigger me and to react to something. And I had to think about, why was I reacting to it? So what was your experience in that regard?
Well, I mean, and this is pretty much universal. I began to see that my children were my best teachers because they were bringing up things in me that nobody else brought up.
Why do you
And
think that was?
well, it's because I was remembering my own childhood at the age they were in their childhood, and whatever they were experiencing that was at that time for me when I was their age was not a very pleasant experience, or some one that I didn't understand, or something that somebody said or did that hurt my feelings. One other thing that triggers me, I forgot to mention this. It's an important one. I'm a big fan of being fair. And whenever I see somebody being treated unfairly, I get triggered. And I'm looking, if I watch TV and I see somebody getting treated unfairly, I have a reaction to it. And I'll talk a little bit more of that later in one of the podcasts when I start talking about why I wrote this latest book I wrote, because it was all about getting triggered and how I dealt with that. So and so the whole theme of the podcast is to really look at what's in the way of you being able to live more authentically and more on your own terms, and with a self that can learn how to meet his or her needs, and not be caught in overreacting to things that they can do something about.
How do you suggest somebody stops overreacting? Because it's such an immediate response. And
You
a
just
lot of
have,
times you're not aware of it. All of a sudden you blow up and
yeah.
you don't even want to do that.
If
You don't even know you're going to have,
yeah,
that wasn't going
and
to happen.
and likely in every situation where you're being triggered in a relationship, the other person's also triggered by something you may have said while you were triggered, and so nothing's going to happen productive at that point. And so when I work with couples, here's what I do: time out. And when you both are triggered, take a time out and think about these questions. Why am I being upset about this? What is it about this that relates to my past? Where did I get triggered like this in my past? And what didn't happen that should have happened that might have completed that or finished that for me? And what can I do now? And then after you have thought about that, you get back together and you share that. Much different way to handle triggers. And it works. It builds a kind of a sense of partnership, and that if both people do this, I mean, it can't work at all if only one does it. But if both people are committed to, when they have a conflict and they both feel triggered by the conflict, that they take a time out. And those things during that time out are to ask those questions that I just mentioned. So what do you think about that?
No, I think that's an excellent idea. It gives people a chance to just step back and cool off a little bit before they actually continue with the conversation. Because when you're in the heat of the whole thing, it's really hard to act rationally and to not allow these emotions to get out of control.
Well, you're not present. It's
No, that's true.
clearly that you're somewhere else with and processing something with somebody else usually, and so that kind of taking yourself out of present into this inner kind of world of unfinished business. It's a lifelong process. I mean, I still get triggered every now and then by something, as you well know.
Well,
And
actually, in the whole picture, not that often, every once in a great while, you know. But
and
I have to give you credit. You really don't.
well,
But
that
a
was,
lot of it has to do with your ex-wife. I mean, your past relationships, where something I did reminded you of that, you know.
yeah, I try to avoid that, but that happens from time to time. And, you know, the other thing that's important to know, and that's why I think triggering has come up for us, is the closer the relationship, the more likely you'll get triggered. That's
That's
just,
probably true, yeah.
that's just, and the reason that's true is that it has to be safe enough to let that content come up even to the surface, because we spend a lot of energy keeping it under control and keeping it out of our awareness. But then something happens that is, it's impossible to just let go of it, and you have to then do something with it. So that's how I would recommend people deal with triggers in the relationship, and also to know that when you're getting closer and they're getting triggered more often, that's a good sign. That means the relationship is closer. But what's the problem is that people don't understand what to do with it when they have that situation in a close relationship and they're getting triggered. I mean, I've had couples tell me, you know, when we first got together, we agreed on everything, and now we can't even agree on the time of day, you know, and that's because they get triggered all the time. And I've had people and couples say, you know, I just walk into the room and I'm triggered by him or her. And I mean, it can be very pervasive.
Do you think they pick out people who might resemble somebody in their past that they want to work out a
Absolutely.
lot of their anger with and the unresolved issues?
Absolutely. I think it's it's built in, and for that reason, I think relationships can be the most potent way to heal triggering, is because it's going to come up, and as you get it closer in your relationship, it's going to come up more and more. And so it's something that if you can learn to work together as a partner, and so if you do get triggered, you can own it and say, I think I'm just gotten triggered by what you did. Give me time out to think about it, and I'll get back to you. I mean, that's a simple thing. If one person is triggered, if both are triggered, then it's a timeout for both to think about what it is that triggered me and where that came from and with whom that was related to. So anyway, we'll continue talking about being triggered during the future podcasts, but we wanted to feature that in the first one today because it's a big one, and it's an important one to get people to understand, because it it's it doesn't have to be a negative thing. It can be a very positive thing when you think about it as, oh, I have an opportunity to learn something new about myself that I didn't know. And so if you take that attitude, then you can welcome triggers and know what to do about them. But if you don't, they'll consume you. They'll consume the relationship. And as I said, I have couples come to me and say, well, you know, we can't agree on anything anymore because we're triggered every time we try to talk to each other. And I've been able to get those couples working together. And looking at their triggers. So it's possible to take even relationships where they might be broken down a bit, or maybe even a lot, and by helping people understand the triggers and how to handle them and how to control them, they can begin to build back what I call the reservoir of goodwill in the relationship. And basically, that reservoir of goodwill means I'm willing to be emotionally honest with you, and I expect you to be emotionally honest with me. And if we have that kind of agreement, when we get triggered, then it can be a search for what is emotionally honest here.
Well, I think with us, it's opened up a lot of good communication.
It has, yeah.
But we've had to actually talk about what happened and explore the whole scenario and get deeper into our relationship than it had been just because something came up. And like you said, as we get closer, it's happening more often, but yet we're communicating better.
And that communication, when we were able to talk about our triggers and we're able to be emotionally honest, brings us closer together. So it can be an opportunity to even bring the relationship to a closer and deeper level if there's a cooperation and support to work on the triggers that happen in the relationship.
It seems for some people it's not possible for them to actually be that vulnerable where they actually admit what they've done or can stand back and see what they've done. What would you suggest for that?
Well, I mean, take the shooter in me. He had mental health. He had 2 weeks of mental health treatment before he went ahead and did this. Somebody missed something. And that's another part of what triggers me is when I see the mental health system that I kind of am part of breaking down and not being effective and with dire consequence. Here's a guy who shoots up 18, kills 18 people. When somehow whatever is what's triggering him didn't get identified in the 2 weeks he had treatment. Now, why was that so? What kind of treatment did they give him? Was it just drug treatment? Or did they really do some talk therapy and get him to explore, what triggers him in his life and what to do about it? I mean, I think we have a long way to go yet to understand all this, but certainly I think any domestic violence situation, any child abuse, there's got to be triggering involved somehow. And with even a school shooter or a mass murderer, they're dealing with internal demons that are triggering them all the time, unfinished business in their own subconscious. And so frequently people who do violence to others have had violence done to them. And they're basically just replaying what was done to them with other people. So anyway, I don't want to belabor this any further. I think we've covered enough of the topic today to move on, and I'll be anxious to move on to next week.
So Barry, what do we have for next week?
Well, this is going to be interesting. We have a fellow who I've known. He's been in therapy with me from time to time, and he has done a tremendous amount of work on his own around triggering and being triggered. And so we're going to let him come and talk about his experience of how he's dealt with triggers in his life and how he's overcome them and learned to control them. Now, we do have, and I wanted to mention this, is we have self-quizzes, self-assessment tools that we have available to you to go further with the topic. For example, today available, if you subscribe to this podcast, we will send you the 10 ways to keep it's the 10 emotional triggers that can ruin your relationships and how to control them. And I only mentioned a couple of them, but there's more on that list. So if you're interested in digging deeper into this topic, just subscribe to the podcast and we'll send you all the extra material that will allow you to go deeper into it. So that's enough for today, and we'll see you next week again, and same time, same station, as they say.
Okay, sounds like a plan.
Okay, good. Take care.
Therapy turned my life around. I was able to face my fears, identify some of the beliefs that were holding me back, and start actually living my life. If Dr. Barry's latest book, What is Your PsyQ, had been available, I would have had a better understanding about myself before I saw my therapist. Or I may not have needed therapy at all. I recommend this book if you'd like to identify and rethink the past beliefs that are affecting your life. His book is available at CICRCL.org. Don't forget to subscribe to Dr. Barry's podcast and receive self-assessment tools. This is Sierra Dahl and Dr. Barry. We're looking forward to seeing you next time.